I appreciate you guys making time for me, and this fits really well into what I'm working on. So I'm glad that we connected, and I'm glad you're giving me such an interdisciplinary perspective here. I saw you invited Bill Dyson as well. That's great.
Yeah, I was just on a call with him this morning with the racial profiling advisory board because the JJPOC asked them to take a look at the inclusion of pedestrian stops into the traffic stop data. So we're coming up with the definition of pedestrian stops, and we had consensus. It's kind of an amazing thing to see, because when we started that advisory board, there was a real clash, especially with the CPCA, the Connecticut Police Chiefs Association, feeling like they were, like it had to be some type of adversarial relationship. But over the years, based on the work, folks have found that coming together is more helpful than being apart. So, yeah, it's great to see, and it's helpful that Bill chairs that too, because I think he comes with a lot of credibility. So, so do you want to know more? I mean, while we're waiting on other people, do you want to know more about Jim and Jim's work a little bit?
Yeah, please, that'd be great.
So in Connecticut, what I do is I run an organization called the University Network for Human Rights, and so the name is a clue about what we do. Is we create with universities and with students spaces, programs, practical, clinical structures that allow students to work with communities and social justice projects that are guided by human rights norms and principles. So basically, our goal is to train students to be human rights advocates. I did this for a couple of decades at Harvard Law School and at Stanford Law School. And basically, the law school is the only place in the university structure that have clinics for people to work on human rights issues. Over time, I became less and less happy with that. How's it going, Daryl? Just because. Oh, all good. Well, I'm just giving a background on myself, but I'll wrap up in a minute, and then we'll get to substance. Just because I think there are too many lawyers in the human rights space in general. We've legalized what should be a real grassroots movement. I think we have to get back to basics. And so, from the university perspective, I've worked in university for the past 2+ decades. I think that the move is to take human rights out of law school. I mean, let them continue to work on it from law school, but bring it to other disciplines and bring in students and academics and others from other disciplines, public policy, different kinds of social science, hard sciences, data analysis, et cetera. And so that's what we're trying to do. And we're based in Connecticut. We work with universities in Connecticut. We have a house on campus at Wesleyan, but we work with the local down to Yale and New Haven, up to schools in Boston, and then nationally and internationally. And just signed a big agreement with 30 universities in Latin America to develop structured training programs with those universities to foster community-based engagement in human rights. So anyhow, that's what we do. And my background, I do a lot of work in prisons. I have for years, but mostly in Latin America. I lived and worked for Latin America for years. I used to document conditions in prisons for a body called the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is the main human rights body of the Organization of American States. So I've documented conditions in a couple hundred prisons in the Western Hemisphere.
Cool.
But I'm not an expert on Connecticut prisons, and these two folks are.
Sure.
We just did the data analysis and the comparative part of the study, but the folks guiding the ship on what's going on in Connecticut are Daryl and Andrew, who've got much deeper roots and understanding of those issues in the state.
And how Jim and I met were through this human rights consortium that is through primarily UConn and is it Baden-Württemberg out of
Baden-Württemberg it's a province in Germany, but it's a sister province of Connecticut, and so all the human rights folks are there, and the human rights folks throughout Connecticut. We got folks from Quinnipiac, from CCSU. We got people from Yale. We got people but anyone in Connecticut that works in human rights, and then anyone in this state in Germany. It's a big state. It's got a lot of universities. So,
but it's it's fascinating, and I started talking on some of the calls about it because I'm sure you're aware, Kelan, of the background in Germany, and obviously with the Holocaust, and a reckoning in Germany, which arguably happened to a greater degree than we had with slavery, and it corresponded in the German Prison Act in the 70s, which centered human rights and human dignity as a primary. The basis of anything that happens within prison there. And how Governor Malloy went to Germany and Scott Semple went there. So how things, happen in German prisons and that system all correspond from that in the underlying laws, which I think in Connecticut, you can argue fundamentally haven't changed since the beginning of mass incarceration. So if you look at some of the policies that are on the books, the regulations, they're still from the 90s and in the tough on crime period. So what we argue in the paper is there's got to be a kind of a real fundamental shift in the perspective and a way of doing things. And so we started with that partnership and then produced the paper, and then and as I think you saw and participated a little bit, we highlighted it at the recent Building Bridges conference. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
I just talked to Bill. He'll be on in a minute. So
Yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting in detail about it. It was really, really interesting. I also I read Isabel Wilkerson's cast last year, where it touched on what you were just talking about, Andrew, about how like at the end of World War II, and they made a conscious decision not to mark Hitler's grave, and there were no statues built to major generals in Nazi Germany, whereas in the United States after the Civil War, we're still dealing with the symbols of the Confederacy, which I think about a lot whenever that pops up in the news and we're talking about getting rid of those statues.
Well, it's my understanding too with those statues, they didn't come directly after the Civil War.
No. Yeah.
Right.
So
Much later.
Yeah.
Different political agenda.
And I saw your article, I don't know if it was from today, Kelan, or yesterday, on Ken Kreisky and Devon Ward suing the state again on the young man from Manson who died from lupus.
Yeah. Karan Neely, they're trying to get permission from the Judiciary Committee to sue the state for negligence.
Is that hearing today?
Yeah, it's right now.
Right.
I mean, they're doing like 1 million claims. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, Ken was Ken's trying. He's pitching it as like he's trying to use it as a vehicle to take on the system as a whole, but also he was thinking globally when he was giving me quotes on the case, which is like if mass incarceration is genocide, then Karan Neely was a victim of genocide. As a young Black man who I can't get at his medical history because it's obviously sealed and such, but there are little hints of it in the case that I can see that the judges write in their rulings that are hints of like signs of trauma and growing up in an under-resourced community. Like he was shot, he was right before he went to jail, like stuff like that, where this kid just had like a rough life growing up, and never got diagnosed with lupus until he went to the outside hospital, and almost died. And then he died a month later.
Yeah. I mean, all of that fits in because, I was fascinated. We had a conversation with folks that administer Husky, the Medicaid program in Connecticut. There's 823,000 individuals on Husky in Connecticut in a state of what, 3.6 million now. Prior to the pandemic increased that to 904,000. And, you probably could say at least 90, probably more like 99% of inmates are either eligible or were on or would be eligible upon release. And yet DSS, although they have a desire, does not link their healthcare delivery with what happens within the DOC. And that's kind of like those systems writ large. We created this black box that frankly, nobody in society wanted to deal with. And now we're trying to say, what do you do next? And part of like our argument is like, you got to dismantle all of it. It's just not piecemeal stuff. It's a whole scale understanding of system change that needs to happen. So.
Yeah. Well, can we jump in? Can we start chatting?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
And you know Daryl, of course, right?
Yeah. I was gonna say, hey, Daryl, good to see you.
What's up, Kelan? How you doing, bro?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good. We never get to chat on Zoom. We're always on the phone on the fly. So it's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, it's good to see you. So I wanted to start off by just asking most broadly, if you guys could talk to me about this crossroads that Connecticut finds us at. What are the crossroads that we're at? Lay the stakes out for me.
Anybody can go first or whatever. Don't matter to me. I think that, and we can all chime in. It's like, it's not just the crossroads. It's just, I think that this is, for me, the crossroads was an awakening onto how human rights plays in basically all the works of advocacy that I've been doing, whether it be from addiction recovery to reentry to police accountability. It all falls right under the scope of human rights, right? All these issues. And once you start, Jim and Andrew's really sparked my interest. Hey, Bill, to want to really pursue human rights issues on a broader scope, right? Because I started to realize, and I started to actually taking a class now where I'm learning more and more about human rights and all of that. And I'm like, wow, man, wait a minute. This is bigger than this. This is like so much more. And how every day, especially as a Black person in this country, how many of my human rights are violated on a regular basis, right? Just normal. So I think that, I'm always believing that we're in a position to educate and enlighten individuals. So the crossroads was that opportunity to enlighten, those, not only just speaking to our crowd, but to others, the broader audience as well.
Cool. Thank you.
And sorry, Kelan, I didn't hear the initial question. I was talking with Bill, who was just getting on. So
Sure. I was just asking if you could define what you see this crossroads at. I saw what you wrote in the study or the report, but I wanted to hear you guys kind of opine and talk a little bit about it. What's the crossroads that we're at right now?
yeah, sure. And so the other thing is, Josh, I don't know if he's going to be joining us. He did a lot of the work on the statistics, but showed that the precipitous drop in the DOC population during COVID, that was just a continuation of a trend, but it certainly accelerated. And with that acceleration comes the opportunity, as the commissioner has indicated, and I think the governor, that they're going to close prisons. And then you put on top of that some of the work that has been done already with the juvenile system, ensuring that youth stay out of the system in the first place. That's begun probably in 2008, 2009, and then is really accelerated. And then the kind of country's awakening, particularly after George Floyd, but it's been a number of years now, of the social equity and social justice piece. And so, looking at it all through those lenses, and now we have in COVID, because of the disruption that it's created, it also creates the same, the equal and opposite reaction of an opportunity. And so, things like, you have the federal Pell Grants that are now opened up to prisoners where they were only experimental. You have these huge infrastructure potential funding that's coming in. What does that mean for employment for individuals within DOC or justice involved? There's just a tremendous opportunity and an influx of resources. You also have, frankly, which we didn't discuss in the paper, the legalization of marijuana and that discussion on social equity and the potential infusion of resources into the very communities that we know people return to and come from in our state of incarceration. So there's just a lot of opportunity. And if we don't seize that in a really mindful way, we run the risk of going back to a status quo. And so That's really kind of, I think, what we're putting forward. And as was mentioned earlier, a way to see forward is through a lens of human dignity and systems that work. I was just reading OPM has been the Criminal Justice Policy and Planning Division since 2010, I believe it was, when the Sentencing Commission was created. It was 2008, has been responsible for recidivism reports, which has happened here and there over the years, but they've been pretty consistent in the last couple of years. And they just released their 2021 analysis of the 2017 cohort of individuals that left prison in Connecticut. And there was roughly 9,200 people that were released from Connecticut prisons in 2017. And 50% of them returned to prison within 36 months. That's very similar, almost exactly the same as the cohort from 2015 that they followed for 36 months. So we're not doing a better job on the recidivism. And the question is 50% okay? Well, in most other systems, a 50% failure rate is not very good. And you have to, and when you have that year and year and year again, you start to think, do we need a fundamental shift in the way we're thinking about things? And when we look internationally, the places that do it right, their systems are not set up the same. So when you have in Norway a return to prison rate of less than 20%, you begin to wonder, all right, so how are they doing things that are different? And the way that they do things different are pretty fundamental. They look at prison as the punishment in and of itself. So the taking away of liberty as the punishment in and of itself. And their role within corrections is all about creating good neighbors. And it's based on this theory of normalcy, whereas life inside the prison should resemble life outside the prison as best as possible, because there's a full-scale recognition that 90% of people are released. And so if they're being released, who do you want to be living next to you when you're released? Who does society want being released? And when you start thinking in those terms and you take punishment out of prison life, then you start saying, well, what should a cell look like? What should healthcare look like? What should education look like? Should the Commissioner of Correction and DOC be the chair of the Board of Education in the largest school district in the state, US District 1? Would you be okay with that if that was your son or daughter? Or, I mean, it's nothing against the commissioner, but his background is not in education, nor is he representative of the community of people that are in there. And so, it's similar to a bill that's actually in front of, that just got passed out of the higher ed in Connecticut, where it looked at creating a prison education office in Connecticut. And we were arguing, well, you already have the Office of Higher Ed. That's their purview. You can create a liaison within DOC, but giving them, authority of the higher ed system when they only have these individuals for a period of time, how are they going to make sure to coordinate that they remain in a degree program after they graduate, or frankly, that when they go from US District 1 into higher ed, that's a seamless process. So, and then there's healthcare, and what I was talking about earlier. You have this huge husky system, the Medicaid system that's run by the state, that the vast majority, if not nearly the entire amount of DOC is accessible to, and that means they could potentially have, which happens in a Norwegian prison. You have your primary care doctor stay with you through prison. So why does it have to be a DOC employee that becomes your primary care physician? You had the Yukon contract, which was a no-bid contract. It wasn't tremendously transparent, and there was a lot of concern over that. But the answer, when we look at other systems, is not to give that to the DOC. It's to open it up to a transparent healthcare system that's already existent in the state. And when you add to that the possibilities of like that we were talking about at the crossroads, well, they just received tablets in prison. And we know that the pandemic created a huge rise in telehealth. Well, why shouldn't or couldn't we have inmates inside getting telehealth services? Everything from maintaining their contact to a primary care physician, to group therapy, to the various things that we know work in assisting people to get back on their feet and ready to return. So there's a variety of things. And I know Bill's big interest has always been employment. And, you know, there's a bill in front of judiciary that I saw that there's creating a reentry employment board. Again, that's House Bill 6463, a great in concept, but the process is important here. It's chaired by, it's essentially entirely appointed by the commissioner of correction, and there's no transparency set up. There's no independence. And so one of the arguments that we make with the justice reinvestment piece is that there should be some accountability or oversight board outside of the system, made up of people that have been that are justice impacted and other stakeholders, that so that we can fully see and understand what's going on within and without our prison system. So.
Thank you. So before we go any further, I have a lot of questions, and I know that rather than just going to each person for each question, I think I tried to tailor them for each person. So I'll try to adjust, and if I'm wrong, just someone else take it. And also, I want to tell you a little bit about the story that I'm working on, so you guys have some better context. So the Mirror is doing a review of the past year of COVID, and I'm doing a story about how the prison population has not only declined, and historically so, but the racial disparities have gotten worse. So, and tailored with that, I'm trying to keep it as narrow as I can, but I think that justice reinvestment naturally fits into it because, you know, if the commissioner is going to close 3 prisons, I'd be curious to know whether you guys think that means that there's money available, not to mention this so-called silver tsunami in 22, potentially having money that could be available for the front end of the system. So that's why I think that your report fits so well into this story. So I think this might be for Jim. I'm not sure if, Jim, you were doing regional stuff as well as human rights stuff, but I'm curious as to whether somebody can talk to me about whether Connecticut's unified system makes us better or less well-equipped to address this.
So Daryl, Bill, you should jump in there. I can talk about the regional comparisons and the numbers and the data and what's going on from New York up to Maine.
Well, I think that just in interest of the article, I think that the question does, because Jim, you've seen other systems, and in comparison to the unified system, and Bill as well, does it make us better? Because I wouldn't know, because I'm only familiar with one system, right? The system that we're in. I can definitely speak to, when we think about the money and when we start to talk about, is it coming to, to the street? And we can talk about that, as well as these other systems that are being created, like Andrew just mentioned about the commissioner, because we want to see where are the boots on the ground when they create these systems too. But just trying to stay within context of what you're doing, I think that, Jim, you might could give us a little bit of input on the comparisons of what you've seen from a unified system, and Bill, feel free to chime in as well.
One of the issues we saw just in terms of numbers is it's hard to compare numbers across, and then we disaggregated the numbers from the unified systems and compared those to the systems that are disaggregated, because it's like a shell game where if you have some detainees in this system, then you don't have to count them, your numbers seem lower. The other thing, and I say it's not so much from the Northeast, but I've worked with prisons and prison administrators, work as in being critical from the outside as a human rights activist and practitioner and academic and observer, that having disaggregated systems is also problematic in terms of administration, because it creates tensions and between bodies, and it also provides spaces for things to get lost. So, generally speaking, if you better to have one system than several systems in the public sphere. maybe different in other areas where you want to have competition, in the marketplace. Just because otherwise things get duplicative as well. Like, oh, we want to change the way people are educated. You've got to change it in this system. You got to change it in that system. You want to take any advance, you've got to do it more than one time. You have to deal with more than one authority, and it just gets more complicated. So this is just sort of general observations. The data were difficult in systems that are divided, and then there's also competing competencies and battle of egos and battle of control that gets more difficult with more actors and in more structures in general.
Bill, you
you're
muted.
on mute. Bill, you're on mute.
Now you got me?
Yep.
Okay, I agree with Jim here. Let me give you an example of something. My experience has been this unified district is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of how we approach providing rehabilitation to people who have been confined. The education is kind of bastardized in its delivery. Health is bastardized in its delivery. If there are uncertainties that exist in the system itself, those two really, really lay it out there as to how services are delivered to people who are captive audience. So we do that. Now, let me give you an example of how that takes place. Who runs education in the prison? Is it the guard on the beat by virtue of how many people or will they allow to come to a class, and how you resolve that issue health-wise, who provides the service, and who determines who is eligible for whatever services are rendered. So you have a mindset that says we ought not necessarily care about how these things are done. We have them there. Whether they're working now is not the issue. The fact is we have them, and that it's somewhere there's this notion that why should we care? Why should we care at all about this group of people who have already demonstrated that they can't abide by the rules, So if we're going to look toward making something better, change what it is, make sure that whatever the function it has, that it's doing just that. Well, there's this holistic approach here that I think warrants some merit. Do we concern ourselves with the well-being of people who ultimately are going to return? And my guess is that no, excuse the language, we don't give a shit. And then the institution manifests that by virtue of how it approaches, how it deals with people and delivery of service. Now what do we do about that? Would education, higher ed be the entity that would engage in doing the service for higher ed? Would UConn be a better entity to deal with providing healthcare, or should we have someone that's separate to do that? And what does it mean ultimately, about the system that we have? So I'm agreeing with Jim a great deal here, and all else about what is it we do and why we're doing it.
And just to follow up on that, so I think the unified system creates tremendous opportunity, and it also has threats. And I think we've seen the threat side of it pretty well. And that means that if you think about how the justice system works, the initial entry point is arrest. Well, in a unified system, the only thing that a town and municipality has control over in the justice system is the arrest portion. So, I've been in Hartford for 30 years now. You go to all of these, over the years, you have the mayors running for office. If there's a crime rate and crime in neighborhoods people are concerned about, their response has typically been, here's what I'm doing with the police department. Here's the thing that I can assure you that we'll do. We'll get the people off the streets. And then you go to the neighborhood meetings, the NRZs and things like that, and you hear them talking about the same issue because the people that they just got off the streets are coming right back. And it's like this perpetual cycle, and they're dealing with that. But this is historic. The vast majority in people in Connecticut aren't. Those people who have representatives in state government and the legislature don't see it as an issue. And so for them, it's out of sight, out of mind. So a unified system creates an out of sight, out of mind potential. And we've seen the ramifications for that. Now, in terms of Bill's point of goodwill, of what happens in terms of how you can change that, I do believe there's a lot of goodwill, especially that's developed of late, of people that want to do something different, but they're uncertain how to do that. Now, we have had municipalities step up, mainly in the larger jurisdictions, the Hartfords, the New Haven, the Bridgeports, and have actually created reentry positions and have said, we're not necessarily okay with someone being dropped off in the middle of the night when they're end of sentence anymore, even though that's, roughly 40% of the population that had gone, essentially was virtually unnoticed for any number of years. But there still is more that could be done. And that's more than just asking the cities to take ownership. It's the larger systems that we have, as Bill referenced, so that it's not all that you're placing on the unified system to address all those needs, because frankly, they don't have the expertise, nor should a system be set up that any one entity controls all of those things or has the purview over them. So.
Thank you. I'm not sure who this would be best to. I suspect Mr. Dyson, but I'm not totally certain. Given the budget issues nationally and in Connecticut, this seems to be a central question to me. I mean, what's the likelihood that this is going to happen? That we are going to be able to get money from these front end closures and get them into these from these prison closures into front end supports? That's
going to be hard. Let me tell you why I think it's going to be hard, difficult to do. It follows practice that we engage in when we start dealing with how funds are appropriated, going to what, where, when, and how it's used. And because of what the practice has been within agencies like corrections, you spend a lot of money. You spend a lot of money on just the personnel side. And so how do you go about accounting for spending more money and convincing the public that that's the right thing to do? So what you need to do with corrections is that you need to drop a heavy hand, but at the same time, you can't afford to tell the public, all right, let's increase the taxes to do this. So there's some built-in mechanism that you use to get this done. An example would be is that what are the practices in correction? Well, there's a lot of overtime. Well, there's a lot of overtime because people will take time off. They have no choice. And at the same time, which agency comes back most often for deficiency, added money because they used up what they had? Well, it's usually correction. Who is it going to argue about it? Nobody, because really we're taking people off the street here. So what you do here is that as you plan for what's to come down the road in the future in terms of your spending, well, here's what you got. Your spending can't be, you got to stand the test of public support for it, if they will. And they will if you're locking them up. So you have a vicious cycle at work here, and that vicious cycle provides support to corrections department to maintain what it is that they've been doing and able to extract the resources from wherever they have built into their budget that will allow that to be minimal in terms of the eventual impact of it. So if that's a practice that's being used, and I suspect that most states probably use something like that, it's difficult, you know, that you are able to take some monies away from it to do something else with. You're going to have to, every dollar that you can save in correction, got to go back into correction. So you're not going to have it, you know, and so therefore, what you expect to get by closure of a facility ain't going to happen. That you have that pot of money set aside because facility has been closed. Not going to happen. Because it is so needed to foster what they're doing that remains.
And for me, this is where something like a Justice Reinvestment Oversight Board is important. There are states that have put teeth into their laws. Oregon recently has, Louisiana has it, where they actually define out per percentages a certain portion of when a prison is closed, savings that go into, say, for instance, reentry services back to the, some that go back to the DOC, some that go to victim services. And that certainly is possible to do. And it seems like other states have figured out a way to do that. But I would think too, to Bill's point, you know, the biggest driver of the DOC budget is, at least in what is shown in the budget as presented, because it's not, you don't consider the bond cost there, is personnel. You mentioned a lot of people are retiring, and certainly there's an element of that that could be looked at. You know, in the other systems that work, though, I think one thing that should be considered is they have a much better inmate to staff ratio. They're actually more as like a 1-to-1 inmate to staff ratio because that's what they feel works in order to provide the services that are necessary for those individuals. But what that does is you may invest a little bit more there, but it comes out in the long run. So Bill mentioned overtime. Well, you wouldn't have as much overtime. You also don't have as much workers' comp because there aren't any inmate on inmate or inmate on staff assaults. The health and well-being of not just the folks that are incarcerated, but the people working alongside them is a lot better. And so those types of savings, they can actually be quantified and then utilized in a process, but it takes people overseeing it in a deliberate fashion to be able to do that. And so, and again, I think what Connecticut should recognize is that we were on a trajectory in 2003, 2004, when we started the justice reinvestment work, of having a incarcerated population that's probably double of what it was at its high. That was 20,000, 40,000. Imagine what the cost of that would have been if we had continued on that rate. And so I think that's a consideration. And in the 90s, we spent over $1 billion in bonding, putting new beds online. We had a contract out of state with Wallens Ridge that was roughly, I believe it was $20 million for 2 years. And so all those were savings. And so there won't be as many bond costs when you're closing prisons. And the question then becomes, what do you do with those facilities? But there is that potential, I think, but it has to be a deliberative process.
About a week ago, I was on the judiciary hearing watching, and Republicans on the committee were intimating that mass incarceration didn't exist. And they kept that, their line of questioning was essentially, how hard is it to go to prison? Isn't it really hard to go to prison? I'm curious what you guys think, how the politics have changed, or have they changed? I mean, has the pendulum swung in such a direction that now we are more open to these reforms, or do you think that there's perhaps more support than Republicans are thinking? Or do you think Republicans are right in that the general public, because our prison population is so low, that perhaps they're not going to be as supportive of these policies?
I think a couple of things have taken place. The environment has been altered. You now have people who are returning home who are staunch advocates of the work that needs to be and can make a case for it. And I think that is taking place. I think the thing that we probably miss, overlook, is that this incarceration has affected families far beyond what we normally think of as people who we expect to see in prison. It now includes other people. And that recognition has removed the stigma for some to engage in advocating for, at least being receptive to the idea that maybe we've gone a bit too far here, and that the damage we're doing far exceeds the safety we think we're getting. And so that change, I think, has taken place, and that dialogue that's resulted from it has been brought on by advocates who felt that they could have been dealt with differently, and that we need for the future to think about doing things in a different way. So in that light, Republican opposition may have picked up on that, and that they are now in a position to talk about it in a certain way that it is not harmful to their careers. So it's a double edged here, but I think it's a combination of factors.
If I can just jump in and add two super brief points on that. One, even if the levels in Connecticut are lower than where they were, and they're at 50% roughly from where they were at the peak, so a lot fewer than 10,000 and about 20,000 ballpark figures, 3.5 million population, you're still looking at 300 plus people per 100,000, which is the basis that's used. 4 times the rate of other Western industrialized countries. So again, lower than the national average, yes, lower than where we were, a decade plus ago, but still extraordinarily high. So that's one factor. And then the other thing I would say is, whatever the Republicans are saying, I think where the bigger and more important change has been in the Democratic Party. So that, it's Joe Biden, the crime bill, and Clinton, and they're the folks that are driving this through, thinking that that's where the energy is in the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party, the energy now is with younger voters and folks who, had candidates who were not Joe Biden in the primaries and want to see decarceration and legalization of marijuana and significant changes in the criminal justice system. So I think that's where the energy is. And then you pick off some Republicans who think, yeah, this is just too expensive. We don't need to do this. But again, I leave the Connecticut state political analysis to you and to the other gentlemen in the room. I'm looking at it from the big picture. Internationally, our rates are still very high, and the 25-year view of it's actually the Democrats who were the key actors in moving this agenda forward, and the change there has come from, I think, the energy at the base of the party that's forced the Joe Bidens and the others to revisit their positions.
Right.
I would agree. I mean, just as it was bipartisan to be tough on crime, the pendulum shifted so that it was bipartisan to be smart on crime. And, when Bill was chairing the probes and Mike Lawler was chairing judiciary, the major crime reform bill that passed that sparked a lot of these changes, to the smart on crime approach was passed on consent in the Senate and only 7 votes against it in the House. When you start having these conversations in a transparent way and you start listening to what people have to say, I think it becomes just common sense as to why you would do things differently. My sense is like on the Republican side, conservative side, you have people that are libertarians that want small government. Well, then why would you want a huge prison state? It doesn't make sense. There's folks that value human life and human dignity. Well, you know, there's something to be said about that too. And then there's just simply people that value resources going to their towns for like education and transportation. Well, if they're getting sucked up by the justice system, that really doesn't help that much. And to the point where you had on the employment side, the CBI came out with a full page ad. This was a few years back now, but they've been consistent, recognizing that the youth in Connecticut are in the cities. And if they're going on a school to prison pipeline, that's not helping anyone. That's not making Connecticut a more competitive place. So I think there's plenty. I think what you're seeing really is kind of a space that's been, and in a lot of ways, poisoned by just the whole national rhetoric in the way that politics has gotten poisoned in general. And so there's some bit of adversarial nature that's just kind of flowing down into the states that, you know, it would be great to not see as much of, frankly, in my opinion, but hopefully I think Connecticut has somewhat of a bulwark against that. So
Yeah. Daryl, I'm particularly interested in your opinion on this because you were the chair of the police task force. You are the chair of the police task force. And over the summer, that role took on a big prominence. I'm curious whether you think that the interest and the momentum in that task force can be extended to prison reform as well.
I would hope so. I would hope that we could move in that direction. We definitely are looking at some different options. Like, you know, we've got to touch like some surface stuff, but I don't think that we touch, like, for me, the things that I'm most concerned about is Black and brown people being murdered in communities, not only around the world, but in around the country, but in our state alone, and how the interactions between Black and brown people and law enforcement is how key that, you know, how those relationships fold out. And I think we're responsible as a task force to try to address some of those issues before our time is up. The other thing is that what you said with the legislators, I think therefore there's a lack of knowledge, almost ignorance to what they're saying, because the fact that, you know, if you don't listen to the people, you know, there's always that saying, right? I believe Glenn Martin quoted it first, and then others have picked it up. And I also say it myself, you know, the people that are closest to the problem, those closest to the problems are closest to the solutions, right? So those of us that are impacted, we're telling you what goes wrong. We're telling you, you don't have to figure this out. We're telling you exactly how these systems are playing out, not only within the system, but outside of the systems and how it plays in our community. But yet we're not addressing these issues. So they ignore the fact that mass incarceration exists when Connecticut was running at 64% Black and brown people within their system, and we only make up 14% of the people in the state. That's problematic in itself. And, you know, there's plenty of documentaries and data out there that shows that mass incarceration existed. And many politicians, some of them lawyers themselves, or just talk to a prosecutor and said, yeah, I locked up more Black and brown people than I did whites. I did that, you know, and many of them have either come to terms with that and said, you know what, we need to do something different now, or, you know, but we can't say, you know, just by saying a problem doesn't exist doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? Right? By not acknowledging it, that doesn't make it go away, right? You know, because if that was the case, I would do that with my bills. Well, they don't exist, so I don't have to pay them. You know what I mean? But that's not the way the world works. So unfortunately, you know, it's almost sad to hear that our representatives are saying that, you know, when we have people right across sometimes the border who have been impacted by mass incarceration, myself included, you know, and they weren't offering me programs when I was going through my process. They didn't offer me programs, they offered me incarceration. Even when I pleaded with the judge, I said, Your Honor, I've never had a drug treatment program. He said, McDougal has a very nice one. I hope you get some help, you know? So our you know, anyone, I challenge any politician that says mass incarceration doesn't exist to come to the IMRP. Come, let's talk human rights. Let's all sit down and let us give you some facts. Or let me bring you to some communities Pick one. Pick an urban community where it's not impacted by mass incarceration. We're talking fatherless homes. We're talking kids without dads. We're talking the Black men, many men are missing from these communities. And where are they? They're incarcerated. So at mass rates, you know?
Thank you. That's really helpful. Jim, this is going to be an inelegantly constructed question, but I thought of it as you were talking. So feel free to take it in a different direction. But I'm curious as to I'm going to sort of think aloud because I haven't fully written it out. But it strikes me that left to its own devices, the system status quo seems to, in America, that is, American prison systems and in Connecticut in general, seems to be more inclined toward human rights concerns, abuses, violations. I'm curious if you think that that's the case, and if so, why you think that is, what it is about American prison systems in general, or the American culture that makes that a stand out for us. I can give you context if that helps.
So let me just rephrase the question. Tell me if I understood what you're saying.
Yeah.
That unfortunately, the sort of default within the prison construct in the United States is one that tends towards abusive, violent rights violations,
Yes.
as compared to prisons in Norway or prisons in some other part of the world.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the result of two big factors. One is it is impossible to analyze prisons and the history of prisons in the United States without understanding it in a deep, ugly history of racism. And you look at you read the new Jim Crow, and you see basically the pivot from the civil rights movement to mass incarceration as a way of ensuring the disenfranchisement and the destruction of African American communities. I mean, there's a lot of academic literature on this. So, but without going into the sociology and the history and the politics of why it was useful over a period of about 20 years to increase the prison population by a factor of 10 nearly in the United States. If you look at the incarceration rates in the 50s and 60s, they're less than 100 people per 100,000, and it goes up to 700-800. So I mean, it's literally by an order of magnitude increase, which corresponds with a period of apparent political conquest by African Americans in the country, right, in the civil rights movement. And then there's the shutdown to ensure continued white hegemony. I don't think you can understand this issue at all without looking at the racial and racist foundations. That's one. And then two is, if you look at the United States compared to other countries in the world, this is a violent country. It is a violent country, and there's deep sociological analysis which has to do with sort of the frontier mentality and the idea of the individual, on his own, her own, their own, fighting the wilderness with a weapon. There's the massive distribution of weapons in our society, which is not the norm in Western Europe, just not the norm. And so we have levels of violent crime, of firearm killings, and homicides in the United States that are just off the charts when you compare them to countries with a similar level of GDP and democratic development, right? And then there's also, part of this is just there's a path trajectory, and which is just about sort of something gets set into motion and it's really hard to change. The idea of the prison is a profoundly complicated idea in the United States. Difficult, complicated in the sense of not a good idea, in that it's about total control. And again, sort of without waxing sociological, but you go back to sort of Foucault, who analyzes this and talks about sort of the panopticon. The idea of the prison in the United States is a total institution of total control, of total lockdown, of taking and then this is where this merges with the racial element. The detainee in the United States, as compared to Norway, is seen in maximum security prisons, and there's a very racist element in this, as a very dangerous figure who must be subjected, subordinated, and controlled at all times. So these ridiculous, the person, there's 3 guards and they lock the, put on handcuffs. And others can talk about this better than I can, but I've just sort of seen this. The level of control of people 23 hours a day in a cell it's just really not replicated in other parts of the world. And then we take it for granted, and we normalize it in movies about prisons, and people think, oh yeah, prison is where you're locked in a small cell for 23 hours a day and you have absolutely no freedom. As a normal idea, it is. Pardon my profanity here. It's a really fucked up idea, and it's a really fucked up idea when you go to prisons. For what it's worth, I've been in maximum security prisons in a lot of countries around the world, a couple of hundred, with folks who were good for paid killers. Like I've been in prisons with folks who are like, what your job on the street was sicario. Sicario in Spanish is paid killer. Okay. And you're in prison and they're walking around, I'm walking in the cells with them, and it's because there's just not this level of danger that requires that people be treated like wild beasts 24 hours a day. And we treat people in this country like wild beasts. And I wish this weren't the case, but a lot of that is racialized and racist. And again, we need to move beyond that. But that's the radical change. That's the crossroads. That's like reconceptualizing the idea of prison, not prison as a place where we strip people of all of their human dignity, reduce them to utter subservience, and control them because they're wild animals. That's basically what a maximum security prison is in the United States. It is, it's a profoundly fucked up construct. I mean, I wish I could use some other term. And if you quote me in your paper, you can't say that. Say a profoundly abusive and irrational construct. But it is. And when you go to prison in other parts of the world, you're like, oh my God, what are we doing? It's at that level. It's not like, oh, what do you know? The BMW is a little bit better than the Chevrolet. It's not like that. It's like utterly different worlds in which we reside, and we understand what prison is.
Is this American myth of personal responsibility unique among nations? And if so, do you think that creates a space that allows for these abuses to exist?
I think that's part of the deep sociology, right? Like if you take it apart, like that idea of responsibility, and therefore, if you do something wrong, you must be deeply punished. Yeah, and you can take that back to Weber and the Protestant work ethic, and as opposed to sort of more, say, in Western Europe, Catholic traditions of fate and destiny and things beyond our control. I mean, yes, there's a lot of sociology about that. I think that's a big part of it, is the individual responsibility, is that you can be a multi-billionaire, and that's great, and we think billionaires are great. We worship them on one end of the spectrum. And then if you do something wrong, you should be reduced to animal status and locked in a cage. I think that's part of it. But again, I think another really big part of it is our levels of violence and levels of racism, which are baked into our criminal justice system.
And I think that piece about, and I laughed when you said it, because I thought it was so untargeted. This is a violent crowd here in this country, this society. It's violent, really violent. And I think it's a part of a story to be told, of convincing people that what they experience is something that they have earned, and it's out of this notion of fostering an atmosphere that's unreal. It is folklore. It is pipe dreams about all the good things that are here, and it's just not so. It's just not so. Up by bootstrapping all of that shit, disregard the violence that's there, and always been and still is there. Believe it. Just take a look at Atlanta and Boulder in a week's time. Just violence,
Yeah.
And they're not we're not going to take a look at that. Never, because that's too much looking inward.
That's the hard stuff. And I think the other thing is that what you said was like, if you do something wrong, you should, whatever. But that goes under that same construct of slavery. When slavery happened, right? there was this belief that we need to, like, they're helping people or they're helping the community, they're doing something good, right? In order for slavery to be acceptable, those people had to be looked at as less than, right? So we had to treat them at a certain, like, you know, they're wild savages. Every time in this country, when we mistreat people, we have to find some deficit to make them look less than, and us look, well, not even us, because I am not in that privileged class to say us. So I will have to say the people that are in charge are white people, white males typically. No offense to present company, right? Is that they will have to say that these dudes are animals. We have to do this, you know, and we're doing something good by doing it. Right? You know, it wouldn't have been acceptable. Slavery couldn't have been acceptable because it wasn't Christian. But if they were saying, we're doing something, we're giving them a job, we're feeding them, we're helping them, because other than that, they're uncivilized. And the prison system does the same exact thing. We have to control them. We have to, because other than that, they're uncivilized. Right? And that's the deep part about it, where we really need to dig deep and really look at that. That's why when we go back to the human rights piece, like, I challenge you as a person that's a racist, I challenge any racist to say openly that this person does not deserve the same rights as you, because that's what we need to talk about. Is this person less than you? Is this person, right? This human being does not deserve the same rights as you. Is that what you're saying? Because when we can talk like that, then we can have real conversations. If you say yes, then that's a different story.
I mean, part of that, just from the human rights, just to jump in, is the idea, like the debate about should folks in prison be allowed to vote? The fact that there's like large majorities who think no informs you that we have a really warped understanding of what it means to be in a detention center. And we collectively think what it means is you lose everything. It is the state can strip you of absolutely everything, your dignity, and treat you like a caged animal. Like, most people think that that's okay because you did something wrong. That is a really profoundly warped idea. That's the idea that we really have to grapple with, which is what I'm just adding on to what I think Daryl and Bill were saying. Like that, we want to have that conversation, because
Right.
it's not about do we want to reduce the incarceration rate to 287 per 100,000. It's like this whole construct is profoundly wrong. Sorry, Daryl.
No, I didn't mean to overstep. I was just going to say that stripping is so real. Like, that stripping of dignity, that taking, when you lose your freedom and you go behind them, when you walk within that building, they take everything from you. They almost take like your soul, right? Because you walk in there, they take your clothes off, they, you know, all of this stuff, everything that is taken from you, right? There's been times where we've been strip searched in a row. You know, you talk about dignity, when you've been in a room with 100 men and you're all naked, that's that slave shit, man. You know, everybody's naked except for the guard, right? Everybody's naked. There's no covering yourself up. There's none of that. Like, you know, and to experience that, or, you know, the thing that really I think that resonates the most is when you get a visit. If you're fortunate enough to have a visit from a family member, and, you know, my kids would come and I'm in the visiting room and I'm like, you know, you'd be good for your mom. You're that dad for that hour, half hour. You're this parent, you're parenting. You're like talking about sports, you're talking about these things. And within 5 minutes of that visit being over, they take you in the back room and they strip you. They take your clothes off, but they take the dad away from you. They take everything from you, and you go back to reality of you're nothing. And the fact that we pay for that astronomical amounts of money to ruin people is crazy. The fact that we pay so much money, we invest so much money in ruining people, right? And not only the inmates, the people, many of my friends, corrections officers, are ruined too, right? They become ruined people too. So I think this is one of our top line items in our state, and we're not doing it. You know, in a perfect utopia for me would be changing the COs into shop teachers. You know, they would live a lot longer, teach auto, teach whatever you know, whatever craft you know, you teach that. And like Norway, Germany, these places where we see dudes learn auto mechanics, they learn these things that, because as a society, we have a vested interest in how that person returns back to the community. Here we don't have that, which is why we see a 50%, 70% recidivism rate, right? And the idea is, I mean, it's almost ludicrous for us not to think that the idea is that the people that are in jail are Black and brown people anyway. We don't care about them. So yeah, we don't care about them. So of course it's not good. They'll say quickly, it's not meant to be nice. Yeah, you know why it's not meant to be nice? Because if it was built for white people, we would have goose down pillows. You know what I mean? If it was built for a different set of people, but it's not built, so it's very primitive. Like you can walk into a cell, it's metal and cement. That's it. You know what I mean? And you go in there, and that's where you at. And you can be there for one of my friends when we're doing a lifers group. He said he's been in the same cell for 16 years. He's had the same cellmate for 16 years in the same cell. He's like, and he was kind of priding himself on that. Like, you know, I've been in the same cell for 16 years. I'm like, man, I can't imagine being in the same box for 16 years, you know?
This would have been a great panel.
Yeah, let's go, man. You know what we do. We just prepping you, Kelan. You know how it go. Be ready, man. Anytime you're ready, bro.
Well, it is recorded. And just as a side note on that, there is going to be a panel on April 20th. We've been doing this one state, one film with a Connecticut collaborative on race, justice, and poverty. And we're going to be showcasing a film that was produced by some Swedish filmmakers where folks from Norway come to Attica and they talk about the differences. And you could see the stark differences that Jim was talking about there and the change in perceptions. And so we're going to be pre-screening that and then having a conversation, not these exact panelists.
We're working on going to Germany too. We got to bring Kelan with us.
Yeah.
Kelan, yeah, come with us. We want to go to Germany. That's the wish list.
I know journalists went with Lawler and Semple and Malloy last or a couple of years
They did.
ago. Yeah.
They did, but we want it to be more Connecticut specific and actually more people on the ground. So COs, former inmates, family members, to be able to also get a sense of what is it like on the ground, both inside, but also in that reentry process.
Imagine taking somebody to Norway who did 20 years in our system. Now they go bring them to Norway and let them see what it'd be like if they were there, you know?
Yeah.
And they would see that, you know, the difference.
I don't know how serious you are, but I would 100% be interested in that, and I would definitely talk to the Mirror if you guys want to impress.
No, we're serious. We've been
we've
been pitching for, and we might be able to get some funds through the Human Rights Consortium. But also, we're talking to this group called Amend that's out of California that does that type of work too. So.
Yeah, that'd be a fascinating story. I want to respect everybody's time. I mean, I could have kept going for a long time, but this was really, really helpful. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Really helpful.
And if you need any other stuff, you know, you got a bunch of talkers, especially me, if nobody else. But if you need more stuff, if you didn't feel like you got your questions answered, just feel free to reach out to us. And it might be easier to grab one of us and just fill in your blanks or whatever. But it's always a pleasure. Anytime I'm in the room with these guys, I'm always on board, you know.
And Kelan, if you want to do a panel, seriously, if the Mirror is interested in something like that, you know, I'm happy to.
Yeah,
we can put something together.
That's above my head. Like Dan Koski usually does those for us, but I mean, I've hosted panels for other organizations like with CCEH and stuff before as well. But
okay,
yeah, I mean, this was a great conversation. I mean, it was kind of a panel because there are 5 of us in the room, but it was really, really, really helpful and informative. And yeah, I'm really glad I got to talk to you guys.
Well, thanks, Kelan. We appreciate it.
Hey, thank you.
Work you've been doing at the Mirror too. It's been great.
Thank you.
Daryl, how you doing?
What's up, Bill? How's it going, brother?
I'm hanging in, man.
Always a pleasure, man. You know, I'm just when you're in there, I'm just like a student, man. I'm just like,
yeah, okay.
Thank you,
Okay,
thank you.
You know the deal.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Hey, Jim, I did get the sweatshirt. Thank you. Nice. I'm a 3X, but you know, on a good day, but you know.
It probably fits you like a second skin, but that's the biggest one we got. I'm getting Daryl to do some PR for our organization. Wear our sweatshirt.
Yeah, we're gonna get it on there. I'm gonna say
Hey, nice,
like that, but I got you.
And sometimes, Jim, there's no other word that you can find other than fuck you. I mean, there's no other way to say it, you know. There it is, bam.
Kelan, don't forget to quote Bill in that, man. Make sure, you know.
Yeah, I just got my headline.
No, I'm glad the kids are homeschooling today. So
Oh, man. Oh, God. Okay. But you're right,
it's
Jim.
all right. They get plenty with their uncles. So.
Yeah, you're right, Jim.
Cool.
Yeah, that's a sociological.
Yeah,
That's a
keep saying it.
sociological term for the prison construct in the United States.
Okay. All right.
Official
Just keep
sociological
doing it.
term.
Yeah, just keep doing it.
All right, thank you.
All right,
Always,
thanks,
always
all.
a pleasure to listen to you, gents, and great to meet you, Kelan.
Yep. Take care.
I'll send you the recording too.
Thank you.
Okay.
So-
All right, I'll see you guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.